Today, today is March the 4th, and we are recording Parshat Vayakhel. Vayakhel, this is the second to last parshas in the book of Shemot. Just a second before we begin. So we're talking about Parshat Vayakhel, and I want to start off by saying that in these last five parshas, with the exception of last week's parsha, in which there's a lot of drama going on, one can easily glaze over at these parshas and go like, "Oh, this is, how much do we need to know about the Mishkan and why all the details?" I've I've I urge you to look at last year's class, which talks about the exuberance of the building, which is built into the text. And these texts demand from us a certain way of reading and a certain perspective. And what I'm going to say is that you really need to kind of squeeze out the narrative, squeeze out the story elements from these texts, because in the description of the Mishkan, there's not much of a narrative there. However, if you ask some questions about it, you'll get some very interesting possible stories. I'm going to give you a couple of strategies for reading this, and I want to then focus on a couple of parts of it. So say it's a difficult parsha, and there are a lot of reasons why it's difficult. It's difficult because of repetition and the details, and quite honestly, it's a very difficult subject for us. It's a very difficult subject for us because we are so unused to this the idea of a temple. Now, of course, we have our miniature quote unquote temples. We have synagogues, and it would be akin to saying, well, here, let's talk about the blueprints and let's talk about the planning and let's talk about the organization, which, as you know, with regard to the shul, this was quite a rigorous process that took place over several years. When the fire took place in our show in 2006, we had to kind of consult with architects. We had to do a lot of different things. And by the way, the story of design and the story of putting things together is a really intricate story. I suspect that almost every person who lives in a dwelling undergoes this experience at a time when they're capable of thinking about this, where they're saying, I want to redo my kitchen, I want to redo my living room, I'm going to do it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And all of a sudden, depending on how elaborate they want to get, they engage with architects or designers or planners, et cetera, or they simply call a contractor, or they do it themselves. And they say, I want to, bust through this wall, et cetera. And all of a sudden, in the creation of space, we have a lot of story, and we have a lot of, the story of how things come to be. Now, I would say that idea is, for the most part, we don't live like that. We're not in a constant state of building and rebuilding, although some people are. But as far as, communal buildings and structures are concerned, most of us are not involved in this. So I have a theory as to why, this um, uh, theme takes up so much space in the Torah. And it has to do with the fact that what we're really doing when we recite these verses throughout the course of the regular reading of the Torah is we're constructing the space through telling. That is to say, through the retelling of the details, we are constructing in our minds, not an imaginary space, we're constructing the space in our minds, so that if we read it closely, we're going to read about the different spaces, we're going to read about the different things, and we'll have a certain picture in our mind of this space. And that is valuable in the sense that it reminds us how central the sanctuary was and how central the temple was in the life of our ancestors. I think that and this I've done only a little bit of reading on this, but the idea that information such as this was memorized and was probably memorized as music or as song. We have, of course, the Masoretic chant to this, which I don't think is the same as a kind of encoding of space through song. There are different cultures that do this, and I would not be surprised. I mean, we have no way of proving this because, of course, there was no way to record this. But it seems to me, since this is part of ancient culture, that the reason why you have the richness of the details is because this was memorized, and this was memorized by song, the same way that most of us can recall lots and lots of information if we set it to music, or we set it to if we remember these songs through music. I mean, give you just a couple of random examples. How many of us think through the alphabet because of A, B, C, D, E, D? We know the song from childhood. Or how many of us remember the order of the months? Or how many 30 days has September, April, June, and November, all the rest of 31 except 4, right? These things are done by rhymes, and we tend to remember them throughout the course of our lives. And it wouldn't surprise me in the least to have some kind of discovery, maybe through AI down the road, that will prove to us that a lot of this information was encoded musically, not in the sense of Western music, which is beyond, after the time of the Bible, but in a kind of pre-Western musical tradition where things were chanted and things were remembered that way, and all the details were encoded through a song, such that in the recitation of this song, people actually had a kind of religious experience. The same way that for example, we recite the signs of the Seder as a song. Dam, Svardeya, Kini, Marov, Dever, Shchin, Barad, I'm sorry, those are not the signs, those are the 10 plagues. I'm sorry. The Kadesh, Urechatz, Karpas, Yachatz, you can see where my head is going, okay? Marlene, you have a question, go ahead.
Does this presuppose that God intended us to be rebuilding the temple at some time? The examples that you're giving are all things that we want to use again.
Yeah, I want to leave God out of this for a second. No, I want to, it's not that I want to leave God out.
You don't know what God wanted?
I don't use this language in teaching this as much as I would use it in preaching it. And here I fully admit to having a kind of split screen. I'm approaching the Torah here as a composite of voices that is put together for lots and lots of reasons, religious first and foremost, educative also, and of course, the deep spiritual yearnings here. So I'm going to offer the fact that this book comes together after the Israelites, after the Jews are kicked out of the land of Israel after the destruction of the first temple, and that this literature emerges in exile as a way of enabling the exiled Judeans to recall their sacred space through the recitation of text. To me, I have no way of proving this. This is, part of theories of how the Bible, the Torah, comes into being as a text. It seems to me to make abundant sense that this would be at least one theory, one reason as to how the Torah comes into existence. Because if you are a people in exile, you want to preserve every single element of your origins in that exile. And I think what Jews, Judeans, the exiles understood in a way that was really, genius, was that if we take the text with us, and when I say that, I don't mean it that they had, they were carrying to their exile scrolls of the Torah like we carry around in the synagogue. If they have it in here, if they memorize it and they pass it down orally, it will define people and shape their behavior and get them to long to return, which is exactly what happened. And as my friend and colleague Morty Schwartz says all the time, when you look at scribal cultures, I'm sorry, in antiquity, these things are very expensive. They still are, frankly. And the cheap way to manage information is not to write them down. The cheap way to manage information is to put it in your head. And so they put it in their head. The easiest way to put information in your head, I think, is to have a song and to memorize it by song. And this way, they probably were able to transmit it and transmit it and transmit it to the generations until finally, out of fear that it would be lost, they wrote it down and then they put it together and they compiled it. And that process probably took place over the course of, a few generations. Um, so in a way, I start out by saying, what's the story here? The story here is not only the story in the text, the story is about the text, and that the text itself, emerges for us as a way to recall something and a way to experience something that doesn't exist anymore. And you can do that with people, right? By telling biography of people, and you can do that by places. You can talk about I mean, if everybody here has a home that they grew up in, and if you are capable at telling this story, you can talk about how it was to enter your home. What did you do? Was your home an apartment? Did you live on 2 stories? Did you live, et cetera, et cetera? And what did your room look like? And all of a sudden, you have a story in your mind, and you could capture something. And I think that some of that is going on here. At least I'd like to think that, um, because otherwise, it has no practical purpose in the Torah for us. It's simply to convey a lot of information that takes up a lot of precious space in the Torah, and without and and it seems to me that it organizes us in that way. Okay, let me go on and we'll go to this might not be the right text. Sorry, this was last week's. Sorry about that. And we'll do this again. Here we go. Just a second. Oh, this is back. Here we go. Okay, so let's share the screen here. Boom. All right, so as much information as meant to be memorized was really the show. Or the telling, the singing is a way of interacting with the space imaginatively when pilgrimage is not possible. Telling is pilgrimage, wrong spelling. And the way periodic recitations of important texts are a kind of pilgrimage. So I'll give you examples. We do this throughout the Jewish year. We will recite Psalm 27, for example, and the recitation of that text functions spiritually, religiously, like a kind of pilgrimage. I use this language when I will teach this. I say, we started the season of repentance, and here we are. We're going to recite this Psalm 27, and it's kind of like we're making a pilgrimage here. That we're reconnecting with a piece of text, and that's a movement. The Passover Haggadah, by the way, is also a movement towards something. By doing that on an annual basis, we are we are creating a kind of pilgrimage. I'm just going to mute because we're getting some feedback. And then the Omer is a kind of pilgrimage. In a few weeks, we'll be reading the book of Esther. The book of Esther itself is a pilgrimage of sorts. You know, we are coming to Persia. And here in these parshas, we're making a pilgrimage to the desert Mishkan. Okay? If, you don't mind, I'm going to mute her because I'm getting some sound in the background, and if you have questions, you'll just have to unmute. Okay, all right. So even though in the broad sense, in the theory that I'm offering here, that this is a text that is creating something in the imagination, and it's a kind of pilgrimage. Even if we look in this text that is so laden with detail, there are stories if you look hard enough for them. And here's a story at the beginning of this parsha. Vayomer Moshe el bnei Israel. Moses said to the children of Israel, Re'u, kara Adonai b'shem Betzalel ben Uri ben Hur l'matei Yehuda. God is called by name Betzalel, son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Yehuda. Vayimaleh oto ruach Elohim b'chokhma b'tvuna u'v'da'at u'b'chol malacha. He has filled him with the Spirit of God in practical wisdom, in discernment, and in knowledge, and in all kinds of workmanship. L'chshov machshavot, to design designs, lasot bezahav uv'chesed v'nechoshet, to make them in gold, silver, and bronze, uv'charoshet even, lamalot barchoshet, the carving of stones and setting them in carving of wood, to make all kinds of design workmanship, and the ability to instruct he has put in his mind. He and Oliav, son of Achisamach, of the tribe of Dan, he has filled them with wisdom of mind to make all kinds of workmanship of the jewel cutter, the designer, and the embroiderer in blue velvet, in purple, in warm scarlet, and in byssus, and of the weaver, makers of all kinds of workmanship, and designers of designs. Okay. So I read a text like this. I'll just, scroll it back for a second. And in the absence of stories and dialogue and, heightened suspense and other kinds of things that we're so familiar with from the beginnings of the book of Genesis and Exodus, filled with stories, filled with family, all sorts of intrigue, this is not. But if I were to ask, well, what's going on here? This is exciting. This is interesting. What does it mean he called Betzalel? Who is this Betzalel? Where does he come from? What does it mean to be filled with the Spirit of God in practical wisdom? Where does this come from? How does this originate? And what are these categories? HOKHMA, TUNA, DA'AT, right? And so all of a sudden, when I see a text like this, it's begging me, it's trying to draw me in and ask these questions in order to kind of be understood here. Okay. And something's going on here. I want to, as the reader or the listener to this text, I want to be able to understand what is going on here. And more over, we have another aspect here, which is that these people are chosen. Betzalel is like the head foreman of the whole structure, and he has an apprentice or an associate or an associate foreman named Oholiav, son of Achisamach. And what is their relationship? Why are these two chosen? Is there any significance between the fact that one of them is from Judah and another of them is from the tribe of Dan? And then what does it say what does it mean when it says that ulehorot natan belibo, the ability to instruct he has put in his mind? So I'm going to stop the share for a second and say, this is all very interesting because we're going to start from a premise that what would these people know about making anything? And how, if we do the imaginative task of going back to the desert and trying to be with these people, then we would ask ourselves, how is it that we have an individual like Betzalel, for example, who knows how to do these things. I mean, after all, these people were slaves, so I'm assuming he was a slave. Um, and in what state of slavery did he emerge? And how did everyone know, or how did God know, or how did Moses know that here was a talented person? And all of a sudden you get a whole sub story. We'll stop there. Susie, go ahead. Unmute.
Well, uh, an email toward Parasha Shavua that I got last week. The author said that some of the slaves were involved with building things in Egypt, so they some of them had these kinds of skills.
Right. Some of these people had skills. Here's the best I can do, which is that and here's where I'm going to go with it. Yes, some people had skills. Where these skills come from, we don't know. But it's, and here I'm going to put myself in the category of someone who doesn't know how to draw, really doesn't know, I don't have artistic skill. I do have some musical skill. I do have, imaginative skill, and all of us have other skills. Some of us may have athletic skill. Some of us have physical kinetic ability. Some of us may have mathematical ability. There are theories of learning about different multiple intelligences, right? That some people have, more language ability, more kinetic ability, more artistic ability, oral, musical, etc. And then from time to time you get a genius. And I suppose within any population, we could do the actuarial analysis. Out of every group of, I don't know, 1,000 people, 2,000, you're going to have a couple of people who are really, really superlative. Bob, go ahead.
I'm just wondering if I were present, if any of us were present in the wake of the making of the golden calf. Moses has gathered us all together to try to reunify us. Would I be sitting there and saying, gee, someone from the higher tribe of Judah and someone from the lower tribe of Dan, we're all going to be together in constructing the Mishkan? Is that part of the purpose? Is that the message I would take from this, or would I just be focused on the details that are there?
Well, it's certainly a message that you and I can take from it. Okay. And I would offer that it may not be lost on in the biblical, in the audience, that these two individuals emerge as leaders because they represent two different echelons of the people. The Judahites, so Judah emerges as the important tribe later on in the history of Israel through the kingdom of David. And Dan is central in the northern kingdom. But Dan is also, these tribes play a role out in the history, later history of Israel. And that may be this may be the way that the Torah is kind of signaling that kind of unity to a different audience. Okay. So go ahead, Marlene. Open.
It opens up by saying he called all the people together. He didn't just call the artisans and say, okay, you guys will be the artisans and you guys will be the water drawers. He said, Vayakhel, everybody.
Yes. Isn't that interesting? And I love the idea that that, and I mentioned it last night at the dinner, that the idea that this is a collective creation, and that everybody has a role in it in some way, that's a partnership. Now, you do need leaders, and you do need the partnership of the leaders, and you do need someone to convey this. And I think some of that is happening here, and I'll show you a text that tries to flesh that out, towards the end of this. And what I'm saying is that you have here this activity, and you have a personality or two personalities that seem to be, extraordinary, and that seems to be not outside the realm of possibility. The same way, as I said, that a child can be musical as a young child, and all you need to do is put a piano in front of them, and they can play. And these individuals exist now. Of course, there were no pianos then, and no, but there are people that have uncanny abilities with their hands, and that everybody else marvels at. And it doesn't matter if you're a slave or you're a prince. Some people are just capable of doing that. And so you might say, and here I'm going to pick up on Susie's kind of comment, which is that, there are slaves who are able to demonstrate to their masters uncanny ability, uncanny talents, and then they become valuable to their masters, to the point that they're able to do stuff. And I don't want to make too many analogies to the Holocaust, but of course, they're right in front of us, where certain talented individuals, certain talent people with, a lot of survival stories are based on the fact that someone could sing. I know a Chazan who survived the war on the basis of the fact that he also knew secular music, and he was able to sing for a commandant. And I've heard lots of stories like that, or someone who was an excellent tailor, and because of his tremendous skill as a tailor, he was able to survive. There's a very tragic, important story. The writer artist Bruno Schulz, who was an artist, and he survived until he was murdered on the basis of his art, and he was kept by a certain commander because he had this extraordinary talent. So these kinds of ideas, these examples of people who have extraordinary ability and then become prized slaves. Now, we don't have the backstory of Betzalel. We don't know that, other than Betzalel ben Uri ben Hur Lemate Yehuda, he's a Judahite, and he's from, related to Hur. Hur is, there's a bit of nepotism going on. He's a brother-in-law to somebody, whatever. The point is, he's an extraordinary individual. Okay, I don't see let me go on. And
They didn't come out of nowhere.
So they didn't come out of nowhere, unless it depends on your theory of genius, and who knows where genius comes from? I mean,
Look at Mozart and look at Alma, what's her name?
look at Michael Jordan. My God, here was this incredible athlete, and it was also drive and practice, and his mother, and everything like that. But here was a person that came into he was extraordinary. Wayne Gretzky, okay, go back to hockey. Wayne Gretzky had unusual talent, but he also sat in front of a television for hours and watched games, and his father had him trace out the puck and he did this for hours and hours and hours and hours. So you could say, on the one hand, there's talent, on the other hand, there's also a lot of effort. And we would be unwise, I think, to say that it's someone can snap their fingers and perform music without any kind of training. I mean, it's been known to happen, and there are prodigies like that. But it's quite likely that talent gets developed in most senses. Okay, here we go. So we go on. So the story here, God is called by name Betzalel's son. Why, how, who, what does it mean? He has filled him with the Spirit of God in HOKHMA, practical wisdom, Tevuna, discernment, and in knowledge. HOKHMA, Tevuna, and DA'AT, these become encoded in later Jewish imagination with its HOKHMA, BINA and DA'AT, and you may recognize that as Chabad. Those are the initials of Chet Bet Daled, and it's the Chabad school of Hasidism. It, at least, it tries to organize itself on the basis of these things, and probably there are a lot of discussions within Chabad Hasidism as to what these different things are. I'm not going to look to there for the difference. We'll find some other pieces in a second, but part of this is to show you, to demonstrate, once you start looking at it, where do you go with this? What do you do with this? What are the stories here? Okay, so what's the difference between all those kinds of things? The Torah puts that out here: Chokhmah, Tvuna, Da'at, practical wisdom, discernment, and knowledge. And we ourselves could have a conversation on these different things. But in a second, I'll take you a conversation of classical sources. And you have Rashi here. Okay, well, so we'll start with Rashi. Rashi is the best classical source when it comes to interpretation. Chokhmah, ma she'adam shomea me'acherim v'lamed. Chokhmah is what you learn from others, what you hear. Okay, it's kind of simple, direct. I learn wisdom. You told me this, I learned this. That's Chokhmah. Tvuna mevin davar bilibo mitoch dvarim shalamad. A person apprehends something from his own heart, the things that he learns. So Tvuna is a deeper kind of knowledge that is, I want to say, almost intuitive reasoning. 1 second, Marlene. It's a way. It's a deeper sense. I'm going to go to the third one, and then Marlene, Ruach Hakodesh. Da'at is something that kind of you get. I guess it's the spiritual knowledge. I'm very cautious as a Jew to say the word Holy Spirit, okay? But we do have this term, Ruach HaKodesh, okay? And that he's saying here, Rashi is saying he's probably, focusing or condensing a lot of rabbinic material here. He's saying that we don't call it muse in Judaism, but we call it inspiration or the that which inspires us from above. Marlene, go ahead.
But the second two presuppose that the first one is extant.
Chokhmah, Bina, and DA'AT. You're saying that Bina, intuition,
Can't have something that you apprehend from something you previously learned if you didn't previously learn it.
So I guess we could debate that, in terms of what is known. I don't want to go too deeply. I'm not too deep an expert in this, but
Okay, Stanley.
there is knowledge that comes to us through culture. It's as young, I think, right? This is the deep psychological knowledge, the cultural knowledge that is part of our heritage, right? We know these things, and we they validate certain things in us. I don't know if you want to chime in on any of that. I'm happy to be educated on this. Go ahead, Bob.
Not to be educated, but one thing I read is that Chokhmah is kind of like data, and another thing is a sort of a
Very
refinement,
good.
sharpening
Okay.
of it, and the other is the connection to action.
Very good. Okay, so what you're illustrating for us is that there are different ways to interpret this, and that is as plausible as any other way here. I'm going to show you. So we have Rashi here who put it this way, and we can, of course, parse out the differences between these two. And Tuna, I think you're quite onto something, which is, in relying on something inside, you're asking the question, well, where does that come from? And then, the answer is, of course, we don't know, but we all understand, the world in certain ways. There are things that we learn. There are things that we have received in a kind of didactic way, the education that we received. And there are things that we kind of know. You could call this, common sense, or you could call it learned thing, or you may not even know where you know it, but you know it, okay? And then, of course, there's knowledge, inspiration. But I want to turn to this fellow. His name is Isaac Samuel Reggio. I quote him all the time. He's a 19th century commentator in Italy. Every time I read his commentary, I think, wow, there must have been something in the water in the 18th century in northern Italy, because there's so many fascinating figures that rabbinic figures. We don't know a lot about them. They're unsung in the sense of that they don't really make it. They don't break through to anthologies, but through things like the Safaria website. I read his comments. I'm thinking also of Shmuel David Lotzato, who is also a very important commentator, not terribly well studied, but lots and lots of material. And these people were brilliant, and they were in conversation with the Enlightenment. You could even see by the way he looks, and I don't know the provenance of this picture. It's Wikipedia, obviously, but he's not wearing a skull cap. I don't know what that means, but he was certainly known to be a pious person, but without the beard, and very Western dressed. Italy, okay. Here he is, his Austro-Italian scholar. He was born and died in Gorizia. And where is Gorizia? This is a map of it. This is my story here. Okay. The story takes me to this character, this commentator, and he lives in the early part of the 19th century in northern Italy, right here, which is on the border of Slovenia, near Bosnia Herzegovina, right? And these places, these parts of the Austro-Hungarian Empire that none of us can identify really, which were really, important hubs of Jewish life, little communities throughout northern Italy and beyond. And of course, they were all decimated in the Holocaust. And if you go, on Wikipedia, and there's research on this. The cemetery is still, his grave is not there, but they say, he's buried in a certain cemetery in that community. Okay, what did he say? Chokhmah. He expressed what the Spirit of God did inside him. And the text says, B'chokhmah, shena'asa libo lev chacham. I'm not sure I really understand this carefully, so I'll ask others to help me, more Hebrew. Mitzayer tziyurei hachachma b'teva. That it seems to me he's saying, look, it takes a lot of smart, it takes a lot of brain to be able to know how to draw, to be able to know how to make a picture on a can. He doesn't say it here, but I'm going to just kind of extrapolate from here that we're talking about an artist, okay? And an artist is someone who looks at, the world, nature, let's say, and is able to graphically reproduce in 2 dimensions what the individual sees in 3 dimensions, and that's chokhmah. That's an ability that very few people, well, not people have that ability to be able to sketch and to draw and to create with their hands from things that they see. That's chokhmah, okay? Tvuna, I'll talk about the Renaissance. Shevin militzot ha-chokhmah ve'efik tvunot. This is a person who understands words, okay? And because ki tzarich bina rechava lavin ofen asiyat mishkan. You need a broad knowledge to understand how things get made in the Mishkan, v'abgadim b'chol pratehem, and the character of the building of the Mishkan, and all the clothes in all their details, because of hamlitzot aktsarot shishtamsha Torah behen, the little phrases. I like this idea very much, and because it speaks to us, we can all relate to this. The Torah says argaman, okay, purple. And I mean, other than I guess I know what purple is, but I don't really know. And so a person who hears a phrase has to be able to take the phrase and make it into something. I'll give you, I'm just going to stop the share for a second and give you examples of this. If you talk about design, okay, right? So, you know, if you have this experience with an interior designer, I don't, but I imagine it as follows. You say to the designer, I'd like to create a space that feels warm and welcoming, okay? So a designer with a certain amount of intuition, which would be tevuna, understands from the words warm and welcoming that I need to be on a certain part of the color palette, okay? Because certain colors are warm and inviting, and certain colors are not. Now, this is not my first sense, okay? But I have a different feeling, as most of us do, when we're around oak, as opposed to around steel, okay? Oak or wood or mahogany gives us a kind of lush feeling. Steel gives us a kind of hard feeling, okay? And so a person, an artist, has to be able to interpret what we mean by warm or what we mean by cool and translate that into objects. And it may not be that difficult, but you have to have the nomenclature, you have to have a kind of intuition as to what that means. All right. I don't know how to read fashion. I don't, and there's fashion all over these days. I think there are a couple of articles in the newspapers on fashion. It's like, I really don't know what's going on here. There was an article on, why pant legs are getting bigger. Why are they ballooning? And why is it that pants are tighter? Why are they looser? I have no idea what they're talking about. But people who know this understand, that it's all about a different kind of expression. We're trying to make something aware. Go ahead, Ilana. Maybe you can explain.
Just a little comment that HOKHMA, people think that HOKHMA comes from the brain, from the head, but according to what you just showed, HOKHMA comes from the heart.
Indeed. Okay. So what we might want to conclude is that there are different kinds of chokhmah. At least if you read different commentaries on this, they'll point to different facets of knowledge. And I would say that broadly speaking, there's chokhmah is the skill at being able to create something. The tvuna is the more intuitive perception thing that's going on, which is the ability to hear something and to understand from what you hear. I'll give you my example, never mind as an artist, but people ask me all the time, and I'll pat myself on the back. They'll say, "Oh, Rabbi, that was such a great speech or such a lovely eulogy," da, 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 da. Okay? So it's a nice compliment. And they say, "How do you do it?" So I say, well, it's not that it's simple, but I have a little code that I follow, which is I listen to what people say and I listen to how people say it. That's very important. And I feel in a way that's my gift. That's a certain art, right? People say the biography of a person, okay, you can run through a biography of a person and give me facts. But if you well up at a certain moment in that biography, that says, listen carefully. If the person is getting emotional about talking about their birthplace or their family of origin or a certain relationship, and they're getting wistful about that invites someone like me to say, ask another question and find out more and find out more. And there's what is being said here and communicated here is something that's deeper. I can get a portrait of a person based on a CV, like all of us could, right? You read a CV, a curriculum vitae, and okay, a person, they got their BA here, they got their MA here, they started out here, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and you can get the arc of a person's life. But if you look differently and you ask a couple of questions, like if you've ever interviewed a person for a job and you say, tell me what it was like when you left and why you went to the next place. That's a story. And that is not chokhmah. I think that's tefuna. Go ahead, Stanley.
So what you're describing, which is very important characteristic, I think, for a rabbi who can relate to his flock, his community, is for psychologists, for psychotherapists in particular,
Sure.
who
Absolutely.
have to listen not only to the words, but really what's behind it, and particularly the emotion, because that will tell him
100%.
or her where this person lives and what has to be brought out. So I was
Absolutely.
thinking as you were talking and pointing to these three characteristics, that the Tavuna or Bina, it reminds me of insight. That insight is insight, something
Yeah.
that comes from within, it's partly from without, but it's an important characteristic in therapy and developing and learning.
Absolutely.
Oh,
And I think it's, look, it's most of us have I think a degree of insight. We are tuned to people. I think it's certainly a trait that we can develop if we listen closely, if we learn. I mean, over the course, and we have a couple of therapists here, over the course of a career, you pick up certain things and clues and cues from people to understand what to touch and what not, and where to what kinds of things to ask, because obviously information is conveyed in so many different ways. Go ahead, John.
Well, what has been said here calls to mind Michelangelo,
I'm
because
coming
Michelangelo.
I'm coming to him.
Oh well,
Go ahead.
he believed that what he wanted to create was already in the marble.
Right. Okay. So since you've said it, and I know, Bob, you have your hand up, but I'm just gonna show it right now, because Michelangelo, and the sculpture is already, here's the quote you're referring to, John. The sculpture is already complete within the marble block. It is already there. I just have to chisel away the superfluous material. I think it's just a stunning example of what the artistic process is. And here, what we're trying to do here is connect a few different strands. We're saying that there's artistic knowledge. Artistic knowledge is a different kind of knowledge from logic, and it's a different kind of knowledge from the music, or the kind of the processing that we do when we read something. Artists have an uncanny ability to be like Michelangelo here, which is to produce. Michelangelo sees the block of marble, but inside he sees this. Okay, now I would say most of us, when we see a block of marble, we don't see this. Okay, this is one of the greatest masterpieces in world civilization, and he saw this. So you see, kind of asked the biggest question, which was how does a society produce a Michelangelo? Where does it come from? And I don't know if there's an adequate answer to that. I once tried to ask Firma Hofrichter, Fox Hofrichter, who's an art historian, is like, why did the Renaissance produce? Why all these people emerged in the Renaissance? And that you have to get a MA and a PhD for. It's a hard question to ask. Okay, here, just another one. So he saw a block of marble, and out came Moses. And and I have it on my website in the background somewhere. His sculptures in formation, which are fascinating examples. But I have people here. So Bob, go ahead, or John, go ahead, continue.
Well, it also applies to his views as a philosopher in the sense that people may have all certain attributes, wisdom, compassion. And if you think of God, because he was a Neoplatonist, God is the process of the force by which these inner characteristics, which are already there, become realized. Because he was a religious man as well as an artist.
Sure. Look, he was, to be able to produce these things and to think these things and to understand what he was doing, I think, is extraordinary, the extraordinary genius of that. Let's go, Bob, and then Susie.
Yeah, I actually wanted to see whether you're starting off today's shore around music and what some people might call soundscapes, uh, is whether or not you're seeing the music that may have accompanied the song as sort of being, if you will, converting the dry knowledge of how to build the Mishkan to help it connect to people in ways that the music was sort of, if you will, the emotions of the environment that would help the people there connect with things more, moving HOKHMA and BINA more together.
So I don't even know where to go with that because the whole connection of the emotional life and music, that's a deep idea. And of course we don't have any data in front of us. I just offered it as a kind of, like a conjecture, like hypothesis of like why all this information and how. And of course, not having the music and not knowing how it was sung and not really knowing what the emotional landscape of people, what that was and how it's connected. We, as people in the Western musical tradition, and by the way, this is a conversation I have with our Chazan, Mike Weiss, who we honored last night. So, we who live in the Western musical tradition have very strong affinities and strong associations with certain musical modes and emotion that probably was not the same in antiquity in pre-Western music, and that's worth its own study. And what that means is we just don't know. I don't know, but where I would go with that, Bob, is to say that music, and here I would say that music, even the pre-Western music, is a great art in the sense that it's part of expression, and that the musical adaptation of text, or whether the text precedes the music or whether the music precedes the text, we don't know, is it's all about trying to shape something. And so what music shapes in the imagination, um, here Betzalel and the biblical figures are trying to shape in actual plastic form, right? Susie, go ahead.
Yeah, so just regarding Michelangelo, so his inspiration to be able to see the final the figure inside the block of marble, that was Tevuna. That was his his.
So I
his
would go there. I would agree with you there.
and
Yeah.
the chokhmah is his physical skill in knowing how to chip away at the marble, because you can take that, a hammer and a chisel and destroy the marble,
Right.
but you have to know how to hit it so that you get the effect that you want. And
Sure. And that's
that's
perfect. Got it. Okay, we'll go on here. A couple of other things. Oh, we're running out of time, but so yeah, two more verses. Betzalel and Olev are to make every man wise of mind, in whom God has put wisdom and discernment, to know to make the work for the service of the constructing the holy shrine. So Moshe called for Betzalel, for Oliav, and for all men wise of mind, into whose mind God had put wisdom, and those whose mind uplifted them come near for the work to make it. What that means is, it's not that they put out a tender call, but they did something very dangerous. Okay, I'm saying this with tongue in cheek. They called for volunteers. Okay, they called for volunteers to help do this, not knowing what the quality of their work was. To me, this is the, I don't want to say the funny part of it, the humorous part of it, this is the most interesting part of it, that you have these two geniuses, Batzalel and Achisamach, and then they say, okay, anybody whose mind is wise or whose heart is stirred can come forward. Now, on the one hand, that's a great thing, right? That validates everybody who has the desire to participate. On the other hand, that's a very dangerous thing, okay? Because it means that someone who has the tremendous desire but no ability is going to self-appoint and put themselves in front of this. And and it's going to create all sorts of interesting kinds of conflicts. Look, I'm assuming that all of us have been in many group endeavors or in different kinds of projects throughout the course of our lives where, we are involved with people who have great ability, people who have less ability, and people who think they have ability, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And things do emerge, and leaders do emerge from these processes, and there are, of course, great senses of accomplishment and great failures, and so that's the story here. Now, I would say, if I read this, with in a kind of with piety and with the kind of imaginative mysticism, and say that this was a miracle. It's all a miracle. The whole thing is a miracle. The whole thing was put together as a miracle, right? All these people that are I'm much more sober about it, in the sense that collective creations are filled with different kinds of drama, including conflict and including frustrations. Take any committee you've ever been on that's had a project, okay? And tell me it was the most, yeah, they end up being very satisfying when you have it, when you finish the job, okay? But there are times when you can really kill each other, okay? I watch old reruns of shows, and sometimes you'll see the reunion of the actors, and they'll say this was the best time that we were a family. You look at Friends, okay? They had their reunion on HBO a couple of years ago, and they talked lovingly about each other, and they all were connected, and of course, I'm sure it was, but I'm sure they all had their struggles and fights, etc. And because they were creating something, and at the moment of creation, everything was okay. It was okay to engage in a conflict. Likewise, here you have, and I want to say, what's the story here? The story is of creation. That is small c create, the creating. You're bringing something into existence. You're bringing something into existence as a group. It's one thing to bring something into existence as an individual. Uh, if you are a painter or a sculptor or an artist and you're doing it by yourself, you struggle against yourself, and you're trying to answer questions and solve problems on your canvas or in your whatever your medium is. That's the joy of it, is that you're all of a sudden you're so focused on what you have in front of you that every single thing is a kind of problem and a solution. Well, imagine you are building a building. Imagine you are engaged in a large project, planning a program, etc., where you need the participation of many, many people, or you're on a team, like in sports, and you need your forwards and you need a defenseman, or you need, whatever it is, baseball, etc. You have different people in a position, and they all have to focus, be together, or a symphony where people play different instruments and they come in at different times, and they need to be together, and they need to have that trust with each other and a bond. And if they have a Bernstein as their conductor, then amazing things can happen. The conductor can bring out from the individual musicians a kind of music that is singular, unheard of, unique, and that's art. So here's what I'm saying. All of a sudden, this text is putting us into a place of art, okay? And up until now, we've been experiencing story and people and drama of individuals and frustration and the golden calf and God's law and all of that. And those are big, big things, okay? But now we're experiencing something that is, I think, intrinsic to the human experience, which is, how does a human being engage with the world of materiality and create something from that, and in so doing, experience just a fraction of godliness? because godliness is the ability to create something from nothing or to put things together. And this is what is going on here. And these texts are kind of touching that whole beautiful, extraordinary enterprise where all of a sudden something majestic, beautiful, magnificent, and functional is coming into existence essentially from nowhere, from nothing. And that is the story. It's a story of partnerships, of human partnerships, and it's a story of different facets of knowledge, wisdom, understanding, intuition. And at the very end, it's also, I don't want to underestimate Ruach HaKodesh, that there's something very deep and spiritual about it, that every musician, you've listened to interviews of artists and musicians, and you'll ask them, like they'll be asked something like, how did you think of the melody for this? And they'll say something like, it just came to me. I don't know where it comes from. They'll say Sting, there's an interview of Sting I just watched a while ago. And the interviewer says, where did you get this melody? And he goes, these things come to me. I don't know. Some people are so gifted that they're able to hear that and to put it together. Paul McCartney, I mean, an amazing melody writer. Why? He can't answer that. Nobody can answer that. And these things, you sit at a keyboard and you sit at your guitar and you strum and all of a sudden things happen. I listen to a lot of this because it's so fascinating to me, to listen to how musicians or songwriters or melody writers kind of create, and it's really very much a spiritual enterprise. They're in touch with that. I have a lot of fondness, as you know, for music and for that, and I think that it's really the companion to a lot of what is happening in the world of religion as well, which is why it's there. John, go ahead.
Well, sometimes you steal it from other people. And the Andrew Lloyd Webber in the Phantom of the Opera, he stole some of the music from Puccini's opera Fanciulla del West.
Okay.
And Bach stole from himself.
So, as my late teacher used to say, Hagonev me'aganav patur, right? Someone who steals from a thief is also exempt, And so, yes, you could say that a lot of that music, it's all derivative. They are all deriving from something, and this is a great, it's a great avenue of study in popular music. Take Elvis Presley, for example. The creation of rock and roll with his first song, "That's All Right," was borrowed straight out of the blues and African American song. I mean, this is what historians of music will tell you, and jazz, of course, also, and which makes it just an interesting human story, which is what music really is at its core. Bob, go ahead.
Just want to say what's so powerful about your shiur today is it gets me to meditate, reflect a lot on the difference between, if you will, the making of the golden calf, which was a creativity of one sort, with the construction of the Mishkan. What is similar, what's different, who's involved, what the process is, and what makes one so different than the other. So I thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Marlene.
Yes, and the camel is the creation of a horse by a committee.
Very good. Very good. Indeed. Okay, everybody. We're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us today. And looking forward to a lovely week again. It's day 150 in the war. We are all obviously praying for the hostages and everything in Israel. Our minds are there as well, as part of our own experience of this time. Anyway, hope you have a good week, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.